All right, hello folks. So thanks for joining the office hours this week. The topic of conversation for my segment is all about lead qualification, as Yelena was mentioning. So as she said, once you have your leads, you're driving them into your chatbot, then the question is, well, what do you do with them? Obviously, you could just ask them a series of questions, gather that information, and then be well on your way, follow up with them as necessary. But what I'm proposing here is to qualify your leads. So the example that I'm going to use is in the restaurant industry, where let's say that we have going off the idea of taco bot, let's say we have a taco restaurant and we want to promote our catering services. So let's say in our messenger bot, in our Chatfuel bot, we have a lead form where people can fill that out and then we can qualify them. So basically we'll ask them a series of questions related to their budget, how many people they anticipate at this event that they want catering for. And then based on their responses, if they are a qualified lead, maybe if they have a good budget, they have a lot of people that they need to serve, meaning it's a better client for us as the taco restaurant, then we can qualify those people and disqualify those who, are kind of going to be a waste of time, not to mince words. So that being said, I have two kind of sample flows here built in Chatfuel that I'll run you through that are fairly straightforward. And then I'll wrap things up by talking about the 3 best practices for lead qualification chatbots. So let's start here in this first group, and I'll collapse these other 2 in the meantime just to avoid any distraction. And so here, I'll just run you through this lead form real quick. We are telling the user, hey, answer the questions below for information about our catering services at this taco restaurant. Then we're asking them, what's your budget for this catering event? What month is your event? Which I know is kind of a weird question, but we're just kind of rolling with it. Then how many people will attend your event? Again, kind of the more people attending, the more food we're going to sell, so the more qualified that lead is. And then at the end, we're asking for their email address so we can follow up if we're not doing so in Messenger. And then at the end here, I'll talk more about this later. We're just thanking the user for completing that form and then sending the info to a Google Sheet, as well as some other stuff that, again, I'll touch more on in a second. So basically how this lead qualification works is not that crazy of a concept. It's not that complex to set up. All that we're doing here is for each question in this lead form, we are using the text card as well as quick replies. And we could add up to 11 quick replies here, but I'm just using 3 for simplicity. And then in addition to creating the quick replies with the suggested answers, the only difference here is that we are connecting whatever quick reply that would disqualify the user, meaning it's an answer we don't really want the user to give because it means they're less valuable as a customer. We're connecting all of those quick replies with that undesirable answer to a block that we've created over here called disqualified. So basically, the user goes through, answers the question. If they get to any question that they give an answer that we don't like, we're just going to redirect them. It's going to be the end of the lead form for them. And we're going to say, hey, thanks for filling this out, but you're not really a good fit for our services at this time. So that's all that we're really doing here. And again, the whole intent is to not waste our time on, talking to leads who maybe don't have the budget that we'd like or other factors like that, people who just aren't a good fit for our business services. So that's kind of the only explanation here. I think it's fairly straightforward to understand. And one other thing to mention here as well, if you wanted to give a specific disqualification message to a user based on what answer they gave, it's very simple. Instead of just connecting each of these quick replies to the same disqualified block, we would create one for each separate question. So here we could have this first one connected to this disqualified block. And then for this one, we could, create another block that says, hey, your event is, before June, we're not catering during, the spring months, something like that. So this is the first method you can use to qualify leads in Chatfuel. Again, very straightforward. And again, I'll talk more about this other stuff here in the next section. So we'll move on to the second version here, which is basically the same approach, but it is slightly different. Again, all the same questions and everything, but you'll notice for each of these set of quick replies, we're not redirecting the user to that disqualification message if they've chosen, one of these answers that makes them a less valuable customer in our eyes. So basically the difference here is instead of at each step the user getting that disqualification message, they are going to proceed through the entire form regardless of what answer they give. And then at the end here, we've set up this redirect to block that basically, for each of those questions, we had an attribute set up for. And so we're saying, okay, if they picked a budget that's less than $500, that first option, then we're going to disqualify them, or any of these other options as well. So basically, again, instead of the user at each step, getting redirected if they choose an answer we don't like, we're just having them still fill out the full form, and then we're disqualifying them at the end. Personally, I, as a customer, would appreciate the first method just because, especially for longer lead forms, it's just immediately disqualifying you based on the answer you gave instead of like wasting your time having to fill out the rest of the form. But as a business owner, if you prefer that, this second approach where they go through all the questions, then you have that option and opportunity as well. Now, a couple other things to mention here, which will actually relate kind of more to my best practices in this next group that I've created. But a couple things here to mention. One, at the end of the lead form here, I've set a user attribute. And I would argue this is important even if you're just doing plain old lead generation where you're not qualifying or disqualifying, you're just having users go through all the questions. So the purpose of this attribute is for custom and lookalike audiences, which again, I'll talk more about in a second. So the purpose here is just to track basically who's most engaged in the bot, who are my most valuable subscribers. Clearly, if they've gone through the entire lead form, especially if it's longer and a more intense lead form, this implies that, hey, they're more engaged, they are more likely to be a customer potentially. And so that's the importance of this. We're segmenting and tracking those users. After that, we have the Google Sheets plugin. The whole goal behind this is just to, as soon as a qualified lead comes in, we're sending this information to a Google Sheet. And again, the beauty of disqualifying and qualifying is that we're not wasting our time with these undesirable customers, to put it bluntly. So in other words, we can just see on this Google Sheet, if we were to launch it, just all the people who are qualified who fit our criteria that we've set out with these questions. And then finally here, we have live chat, and I'll talk about that in the best practices, which we can discuss now. And you'll notice here, I decided to be a little quirky and kind of convert Chatfuel into my slide deck instead of using something like Google Slides or PowerPoint. So fun. Anyway, 3 best practices here, 3 tips for lead qualification if you are building a bot like this. The first one here, and I'm going to see if I can enlarge this a little bit. There we go. So the first tip here is get them while they're hot. Basically, this was the purpose of the live chat plugin that I added at the end of that lead qualification flow. So obviously, we're sending that information to Google Sheets as well. You could do something like add the notify admin via email plugin as well. So basically, whenever a new qualified lead comes in, you get alerted that Google Sheet gets updated. But in addition to that, what I would recommend, if you have the resources to support it, is using the live chat plugin and then navigating to this live chat tab over here so that either you or your support team can immediately respond to and engage with somebody who has been determined as qualified. Because obviously, the shorter you can, compress that sales timeline, if you will, the better. So in other words, the faster you can respond to somebody who's qualified, especially if they have proactively expressed an interest, the better, as opposed to, waiting a day or just waiting a couple hours to email them or respond back in the chat. So whenever possible, use live chat to get people while they're hot and convert them ASAP. Second here is what I call clone the people you love, which sounds kind of like a Frankenstein or mad scientist kind of approach. But basically what I'm saying here, and this is the purpose of that attribute at the end of the lead form that we added, The purpose here is to, again, track users who are fully completing that lead form, meaning if you're implementing the qualification steps, only people who complete that form are qualified. So by adding that attribute, you're able to segment those most qualified, those most valuable users. And then you can go into the People tab based off of this segment that you've created. I'll choose qualified leads here, which I've created previously as a segment. And now that you see all these qualified and valuable people, you can save the segment or export it rather to a CSV file, upload that to Ads Manager as a customer lookalike audience. Although if you want to clone kind of this audience, you'd use a lookalike audience. Or better yet, you could use the segment sync feature, which we are currently rolling out. But again, a great way to take advantage of your qualification instead of just saying like, oh, cool, I have all these qualified leads. Now let's follow up with them and convert them. You can also run Facebook ads to target new users, new leads who are similar to those existing qualified ones to help reduce your ad costs and so forth. And then one final tip here, number 3, is that transparency is king. So again, I showed you the 2 different approaches, and I'm sure there are many more approaches to this as well, but the 2 main approaches to lead qualification, either immediately disqualifying someone after they answer a question or having them go through the whole process and then answer, or then tell them that they're just, that they're disqualified. So what I would recommend is the first approach, like I mentioned earlier, just immediately tell them, hey, you're not qualified. Don't waste their time. Don't waste your time. And also, if you're using the second method, just be upfront. Tell them like, hey, you're not a good fit for our business at this time, or you don't qualify for this service. Because if you just leave them hanging at the end of it, you're like, oh, thanks for answering the questions, then it doesn't really set the expectations. So that's how to build a basic lead qualification flow in Chatfuel to, again, save your business time, save you resources, maximize what you're doing in Messenger, and again, maximize your human resources. So that's how to do this. Those are the 3 best practices, and happy botting.
Yeah, I don't see any questions now, but if there are any, now's the moment. Yeah, so that's really interesting. I mean, like picking between those 2 approaches, are you going to let the user go through the entire flow, or yeah? I was actually thinking about that yesterday because I was talking to one of our clients, and it really depends on a case-by-case basis and on like what kind of a relationship you want to actually establish.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's kind of the struggle that I had when I was thinking through this too. I was like, for some questions, I feel like it's more appropriate than others. Like for the budget question, like as much as you want to be upfront and just tell the user like, hey, you're disqualified, don't waste your time answering any more questions. At the same time, it feels like disingenuous as, a business to be like, basically like, you can't afford the services or something like that. So it's controversial in some ways,
yeah.
but at least for me, again, from a customer perspective, I'm always like, I would rather, know, and granted, again, for like 3 questions doesn't really make a difference, but 20 or more questions, something like that, it's like, I wouldn't want to, waste time, especially if it's something like an open-ended user input. Although I guess that's another best practice, use closed-ended questions that users can go through. That makes it easier to qualify or disqualify. You don't have to use, the APIs or anything like that.